Have you ever witnessed someone risk everything for a complete stranger? Maybe you've seen it in your own community, or perhaps you've been that person yourself. There's something profound about the moment when self-preservation gives way to protecting someone else, especially when that someone is just a child. Mia Chin had been living in the narrow alley behind Romano's restaurant for 3 weeks, and she'd learned to make herself invisible. At 24, she'd perfected the art of blending into shadows, of moving quietly enough that the kitchen staff never noticed her sleeping against the brick wall near the dumpster. The September air in downtown Chicago carried the scent of garlic and basil from the restaurant's exhaust fans, a cruel reminder of meals she couldn't afford. 6 months ago, she'd had an apartment, a job at a marketing firm, and what she'd thought was a loving relationship. 6 months ago, Derek Martinez had seemed charming and protective. It wasn't until the first time he'd grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise that she'd realized protective could become possessive, and possessive could become dangerous. When she'd finally gathered the courage to leave, he'd already destroyed her credit, gotten her fired through his connections, and made sure she had nowhere to go. The alley had become home because it was one of the few places in the city where she felt safe from Derek's searching. He'd never think to look for his former girlfriend, the one with the college degree and career ambitions, sleeping rough behind an Italian restaurant in Little Italy. Most nights, the irony wasn't lost on her that she'd traded one dangerous situation for another kind of vulnerability entirely. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something was wrong. Mia had been dozing fitfully against the cold brick when the sound of car doors slamming jerked her fully awake. The restaurant had closed an hour ago, and this part of the neighborhood usually went quiet after midnight. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows between the dumpster and the wall, heart hammering as voices carried through the darkness. That's when she saw him. A little boy, maybe 8 years old, was walking alone down the sidewalk in front of the restaurant. Even in the dim streetlight, she could see he was well-dressed, his small frame dwarfed by what looked like an expensive jacket. He moved with the confidence of a child who'd never known real danger, completely unaware of the 2 men who had emerged from the black sedan and were now following him at a distance. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen enough movies, heard enough stories about this neighborhood, to recognize the deliberate way the men moved. This wasn't random. This was planned. The child kept walking, and the men kept following. One of them reached inside his jacket, and Mia's blood turned to ice when she caught the glint of metal under the streetlight. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden. She had nothing. No phone to call for help, no weapon, no training. She was a homeless woman who weighed barely 120 pounds, weak from months of irregular meals and constant stress. Getting involved would be suicide. But the little boy had stopped walking. He'd turned around, finally sensing he was being followed, and even from 30 feet away, Mia could see the fear that crossed his small face when he spotted the men approaching him. Time seemed to slow as one of the men called out something in Italian that sounded like a name. The boy took a step backward, then another, and Mia realized with sick certainty that he was about to run directly toward her alley, toward what the men probably thought was a dead end. She could let it happen, could stay hidden and hope the boy was fast enough, smart enough, lucky enough to escape whatever these men planned. Could tell herself it wasn't her problem, wasn't her responsibility, wasn't her business. Instead, Mia Chun launched herself from the shadows. She didn't think about Derek, didn't think about her own safety, didn't think about anything except the terror in a child's eyes. She ran toward the men with every ounce of strength her malnourished body could muster, screaming at the top of her lungs to draw their attention away from the boy. The first gunshot shattered the night air before she'd taken 5 steps. Pain exploded through her shoulder, spinning her sideways, but momentum carried her forward. The second shot caught her in the chest, and she felt something vital tear inside her. The third bullet hit her abdomen as she stumbled, and the fourth found her hip as she went down hard on the concrete. But she'd done it. She'd put herself between the gunman and the child, and through the haze of pain and shock, she could hear the boy screaming for his papa in Italian. Good. That meant he was alive. That meant her sacrifice had meant something. The men were shouting now, voices sharp with panic. One of them was yelling into a phone, and through the ringing in her ears, Mia caught fragments about the plan going wrong, about complications, about needing to leave immediately. Car doors slammed again. An engine roared to life. and then there was just the sound of tires squealing against asphalt as they fled. The boy was crying somewhere nearby, but Mia couldn't turn her head to see him. Couldn't do anything except lie on the cold sidewalk and watch her blood spread in a dark pool beneath her. This was it then. She'd saved a child's life, and it had cost her everything. Somehow, that felt like a fair trade. More cars were arriving now, doors slamming, voices shouting in rapid Italian. Heavy footsteps approached, and then a shadow fell across her vision. Someone dropped to their knees beside her, and when she managed to focus her eyes, she found herself looking up at the most striking man she'd ever seen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair and olive skin that spoke of Italian heritage. His suit was expensive, perfectly tailored, and his hands as he knelt beside her were strong and careful. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, a deep brown that seemed to see everything, assess everything, understand everything in a single glance. "Papa," the little boy was saying through his tears. "Papa, she saved me. She saved me." The man's jaw tightened as he looked from the boy to Mia, taking in the blood, the bullet wounds, the fact that a complete stranger had nearly died protecting his son. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent that made his words sound like music, even though his tone was sharp with command. "Get the car," he ordered someone Mia couldn't see. "Call Dr. Romano immediately. Tell him we're coming in hot with a trauma victim and he needs to be ready to operate." Strong arms lifted her from the concrete, and Mia bit back a scream as fire shot through every nerve ending. The man carrying her moved with surprising gentleness despite his obvious urgency, and she found herself pressed against a chest that smelled like expensive cologne and felt solid enough to stop bullets. "Stay with me," he said, and she realized he was talking to her. His accent made the words sound like a prayer. "You're going to be fine. I'm going to make sure you're fine." She tried to speak, tried to ask about the boy, but only a weak sound emerged from her throat. Blood was filling her mouth now, and she could feel herself slipping away despite his words. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the warmth of his arms and the sound of his voice promising her safety. For the first time in months, Mia Chin felt protected instead of afraid. She had no way of knowing that the man carrying her was Dante Romano, head of one of Chicago's most powerful crime families. She didn't know that the child she'd saved was the most precious thing in his world, or that her sacrifice had just created a debt he would spend the rest of his life trying to repay. All she knew was that she'd done the right thing, and somehow, against all odds, she wasn't going to die alone in an alley after all. The first thing Mia noticed was softness. Real softness, the kind she hadn't felt in 6 months of sleeping on concrete and cardboard. Egyptian cotton sheets, her mind supplied automatically, though she couldn't remember the last time she'd touched anything so luxurious. The second thing she noticed was the absence of pain, or at least the sharp edge of it, replaced by a floating sensation that suggested heavy medication. She opened her eyes slowly, expecting to see the familiar brick walls of her alley or maybe the sterile ceiling of a hospital emergency room. Instead, she found herself staring up at an ornate plaster ceiling with crown molding that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. The room around her was enormous, decorated in warm earth tones with furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about European luxury. Confusion hit first, followed immediately by panic. Where was she? How had she gotten here? The last clear memory was of gunshots and pain and a man with kind brown eyes promising her safety. Everything after that was fragments and impressions, surgery and voices speaking in rapid Italian, and the sensation of floating between consciousness and darkness. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, as fire shot through her torso. A soft gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it, and within seconds, the door to her room opened. The man from her memories stepped inside, and Mia felt her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He was even more striking in full light than he'd been in the shadows of that alley. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the kind of controlled grace that suggested both physical capability and absolute confidence. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his olive skin smooth except for the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who'd seen too much. The suit he wore was clearly bespoke, probably worth more than most people's cars, and it fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those deep brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her condition with a single glance. There was intelligence there, and something that might have been gentleness, but underneath it all was a hardness that suggested this was not a man who tolerated being crossed. "You're awake," he said, and his accent was even more pronounced now that she was lucid enough to really hear it. Italian, definitely, but smoothed by years of living in America. "How do you feel?" Mia tried to speak and discovered her throat was desert dry. Before she could struggle with words, he was moving to the bedside table, pouring water from an expensive-looking pitcher into a crystal glass. He approached the bed slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt, and held the glass to her lips. The water was cool and perfect, and she drank gratefully before finding her voice. "Where am I?" she managed, though the words came out as barely more than a whisper. "You're safe," he replied, setting the glass aside. "That's the most important thing. You're in my home, recovering from surgery. Do you remember what happened?" Flashes came back to her then. The little boy walking alone, the men with guns, her desperate decision to intervene. "Your son," she said urgently, trying to sit up again despite the pain. "Is he okay? Did they hurt him?" Something shifted in the man's expression, a warmth that transformed his entire face. "Luca is fine," he assured her. "Completely unharmed, thanks to you. You saved his life." "Good," Mia breathed, sinking back against the pillows. "That's good." She studied his face, taking in the expensive watch on his wrist, the quality of his clothes, the obvious wealth that surrounded them. "Who are you?" The man was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "My name is Dante Romano," he said finally. "Luca is my son, and you saved the most important thing in my world. That means I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." Romano. The name was familiar, tickling at the edge of her memory from news reports and whispered conversations she'd overheard on the streets. Romano family. Chicago. Organized crime. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity, and Mia felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh God," she whispered. "You're Mafia." Dante's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't deny it. "I'm a businessman," he said carefully. "Some of my business ventures operate in areas where the law is less clearly defined. But right now, what I am doesn't matter. What matters is that you nearly died protecting my child, and I intend to make sure you're taken care of." Terror began to creep up Mia's spine, replacing the gratitude she'd felt moments before. She'd heard the stories about people who got involved with organized crime, even accidentally. People who disappeared. People who knew too much and became liabilities. "I don't want anything," she said quickly. "I don't want payment or favors or anything. I just want to leave. Please." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Even if I were inclined to let you walk away, which I'm not, you couldn't. Dr. Romano says you'll need at least 6 weeks of recovery time before you can even think about leaving bed for more than a few minutes." The bullets did significant damage. 6 weeks. The words hit her like a physical blow. 6 weeks in the house of a man who probably ordered people killed before breakfast. 6 weeks of being at the mercy of someone whose world she didn't understand and couldn't navigate. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "I can see what you're thinking," Dante said quietly. "You're wondering if you've traded one danger for another. You're wondering what I want from you, what price I'll expect you to pay for my protection." Mia opened her eyes to find him watching her with something that might have been understanding. "Isn't that exactly what this is?" she asked. "No," Dante replied firmly. "What this is me trying to honor a debt. You gave everything to protect my son. The least I can do is make sure you heal safely and have somewhere to go when you're ready. Nothing more, nothing less." Before Mia could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Dante called, and the door opened to reveal the little boy from the alley. He looked much smaller in the daylight, probably closer to 7 than 8, with dark curls and his father's brown eyes. But where Dante's gaze was calculating and controlled, the boy's was open and filled with unmistakable hero worship. "Papa, can I see her now?" the boy asked in accented English. "Is she feeling better?" "Much better," Dante confirmed, his entire demeanor softening as he looked at his son. "Luca, this is the brave lady who helped you. Her name is Mia." The boy approached the bed with careful steps, as if he understood she was fragile. "Thank you," he said solemnly. "Papa says you got hurt because you saved me. I'm very sorry you got hurt. Something in Mia's chest tightened at the earnest gratitude in his young voice. It's okay, she managed. I'm glad you're safe. That's all that matters. Luca beamed at her response, and she could see so much of his father in the curve of his smile. Papa says you're going to stay with us while you get better. I can show you my room if you want. And my soccer ball. Do you like soccer? Despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and overwhelming uncertainty about her situation, Mia found herself smiling back at him. I've never played, she admitted, but I'd love to see your soccer ball. Really? Luca's face lit up like Christmas morning. I could teach you. When you're better, I mean. Papa is teaching me all the best tricks. Watching the interaction between Mia and his son, Dante felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Luca had always been shy around strangers, cautious in the way children of powerful men learn to be early. But with Mia, he was completely natural, completely trusting. And she, despite her obvious fear of the situation she'd found herself in, was responding to his son with genuine warmth and attention. That's very kind of you, Mia was saying to Luca. I'd like that very much. All right, Dante interjected gently. Mia needs to rest now. You can visit again tomorrow. Luca nodded obediently and moved toward the door, but not before turning back to Mia one more time. I'm really glad you're okay, he said. Papa says you're a hero, and I think he's right. After the boy left, silence settled over the room again. Mia stared at the closed door, her mind reeling from everything she'd learned in the past 20 minutes. She was in the home of a Mafia boss, recovering from gunshot wounds, completely dependent on the kindness of a man whose business involved activities she didn't want to think about. And yet, watching him with his son, seeing the obvious love and gentleness there, she found it harder to see him as the monster her imagination had conjured. He's a good kid, she said finally. He's everything to me, Dante replied simply, which is why what you did, what you sacrificed, means more than you could possibly understand. Mia looked at him then, really looked, trying to see past the expensive clothes and the reputation to the man underneath. What she saw was complexity, danger, yes, but also intelligence and something that might have been honor. A man who was probably capable of terrible things, but who clearly loved his son with every fiber of his being. I still don't want anything, she said quietly. When I'm healed, I just want to go back to my life. Dante's expression grew thoughtful. What life? He asked gently. Forgive me, but my people did some checking while you were unconscious. You have no current address, no employment, no emergency contacts. The life you're talking about returning to is sleeping in alleys and scavenging for food. The words stung because they were true, but Mia lifted her chin defiantly. It's still my choice to make. Of course it is, Dante agreed. But perhaps, while you're recovering, you might consider whether there are other choices available to you. Better choices. Before she could ask what he meant by that, exhaustion hit her like a wave. The conversation, the emotional upheaval, the medication, all of it was catching up with her at once. Her eyelids grew heavy despite her efforts to stay alert. Sleep, Dante said softly, reaching over to adjust her blankets with surprising gentleness. You're safe here, Mia. Whatever else you might think about me or my world, know that you are completely safe under my roof. As consciousness slipped away again, Mia found herself believing him, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. 2 weeks had passed since Mia first opened her eyes in Dante's penthouse, and she was beginning to understand that recovery meant more than just healing from bullet wounds. It meant adjusting to a world so far removed from her recent reality that sometimes she wondered if she died in that alley, and this was some elaborate afterlife fantasy. She was stronger now, able to walk around the guest room without feeling like her chest might tear open, able to sit up for longer periods without exhaustion pulling her back under. The physical therapy sessions with Dr. Romano were helping, though she suspected the expensive private care was probably costing Dante more than most people made in a year. Every time she tried to bring up the subject of payment or debt, he would give her a look that suggested the topic was closed for discussion. This morning, like every morning for the past week, she found Dante in the kitchen when she made her careful way downstairs. He was already dressed for business in another one of his impeccable suits, but he'd removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves while he worked at the stove. Something about seeing him like that, domestic and relaxed, made her heart do things she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Good morning, he said without turning around, somehow always aware of her presence before she announced it. How did you sleep? Better, she replied honestly, settling into the chair at the kitchen island that had become her usual spot. The medication is helping with the pain. He turned then, holding a plate of what looked like the most perfect eggs Benedict she'd ever seen. His movements were economical and precise, the same way he seemed to approach everything in his life. There was something mesmerizing about watching him cook, about seeing those strong hands that she suspected were capable of violence handle delicate tasks with such care. You don't have to keep cooking for me, she said as he placed the plate in front of her. I can manage something simple. Dante poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine and set a cup beside her plate. I enjoy cooking, he replied. It's something I learned to do for Luca when his mother died. Besides, you need proper nutrition to heal properly. It was the first time he'd mentioned Luca's mother directly, and Mia felt a flutter of curiosity. She'd noticed the absence of any feminine touches in the penthouse, no family photos that included a woman, no indication that this had ever been a family home for anyone but father and son. How long has it been? She asked carefully, not wanting to overstep, but unable to stop herself from wanting to know more about this man who'd opened his home to her. For years, Dante replied, his voice carefully neutral. Luca was 3 when Sophia passed. Cancer. I'm sorry, Mia said softly. That must have been incredibly difficult. Something flickered across Dante's features, an emotion too complex to name. It was, he agreed. But we managed. We had each other. The simple statement carried weight that spoke of long nights and difficult adjustments, and a man learning to be both mother and father to a grieving child. Mia found herself wanting to ask more questions, wanting to understand the layers of this man who could be so gentle with his son and so carefully controlled with everyone else. Instead, she took a bite of the eggs Benedict and made an involuntary sound of pleasure. This is incredible, she said. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother insisted all her sons learn to take care of themselves, Dante replied, something that might have been amusement flickering in his dark eyes. She said she wasn't raising men who would be helpless without a woman to care for them. Smart woman, Mia murmured, then paused as something occurred to her. Sons, plural? I have 2 younger brothers, Dante confirmed. Marco runs security for our operations, and Alessio handles our legitimate business interests. You'll probably meet them eventually. Our operations. The reminder of what Dante actually did for a living sent a small chill through Mia, though she was beginning to understand that his world was more complex than simple criminal stereotypes. Still, she found herself curious about the man behind the reputation. What about you? Dante asked, settling into the chair across from her with his own coffee. What did you do before? The question she'd been dreading. Mia set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished as memories she'd been trying to avoid came flooding back. I worked in marketing, she said quietly. Had an apartment in Lincoln Park, a normal life. Everything changed when I met Derek. She could feel Dante's attention sharpen, though his expression remained carefully neutral. Tell me about Derek, he said. Where to start? The charm that had drawn her in, or the gradual erosion of her independence that had followed. He seemed perfect at first, she said finally. Successful, attentive, protective. I thought I was lucky to have someone who cared so much about me. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But protective became possessive. He didn't like my friends, my job, my independence. At first it was subtle, just suggestions about how I could do things better, be better. Then it escalated. Mia wrapped her arms around herself, the movement pulling at her healing wounds but providing a small measure of comfort. He got me fired by spreading lies about my reliability to my boss, who was his golf partner. Ruined my credit by opening accounts in my name. Made sure I had nowhere to go when I finally worked up the courage to leave. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and when Mia looked up, she saw something dangerous flicker behind Dante's eyes. Where is Derek now? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. I don't know, Mia admitted. I've been careful to stay off his radar since I left. He has connections, money, resources I don't have. For the past 6 months, hiding has been my only option. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his coffee forgotten as he processed what she'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her shiver. No one will hurt you again, he said simply. Not him, not anyone. You're under my protection now. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, should have frightened her. Instead, for the first time in months, Mia felt something that might have been safety settling in her chest. Later that afternoon, Dante surprised her by suggesting they cook dinner together. Luca was at soccer practice with one of Dante's security men acting as chauffeur and bodyguard, leaving them alone in the vast penthouse. Mia had been reading in the living room when Dante emerged from his home office, having changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a simple black sweater that somehow made him look even more dangerous and appealing. "I thought I'd make risotto," he said. "Would you like to help? Or would you prefer to rest?" The invitation was casual, but something in his tone suggested it mattered to him whether she said yes. "I'd like to help," she replied, closing her book and following him into the kitchen. Working alongside him was an exercise in controlled torture. Every time he reached around her for an ingredient, she caught his scent, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. When he guided her hand to show her the proper technique for stirring risotto, the warmth of his palm against hers sent electricity shooting up her arm. She was hyper-aware of everything about him. The way he moved with predatory grace even in the domestic setting of his kitchen. The concentration on his face as he explained the importance of adding stock slowly. The flash of satisfaction when she managed to get the technique right. Most dangerously, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, something heated and considering in his dark gaze. "You're a natural," he murmured when she successfully completed a particularly tricky maneuver with the stirring spoon. His voice was lower than usual, and he was standing closer than strictly necessary. Mia looked up to find him watching her intently, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with possibility. She was acutely aware that they were alone, that he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, that his mouth was only inches from hers. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. For a moment longer, she realized she wanted him to. Then the front door opened and Luca's voice echoed through the penthouse, announcing his return from practice. Dante stepped back smoothly, as if the moment of tension had never existed, though Mia noticed his breathing was slightly unsteady. "Papa," Luca called, running into the kitchen with grass stains on his uniform and joy radiating from every pore. "We won. Coach says I scored the best goal he's seen all season." The evening passed in a blur of celebration and family dinner, Luca regaling them with detailed play-by-play accounts of his soccer triumph. But underneath the comfortable domesticity, Mia remained aware of the new tension between her and Dante, the way his eyes seemed to track her movements, the way her skin felt sensitized whenever he was near. It wasn't until much later, after Luca had gone to bed and they were sitting in the living room with wine, that the conversation turned serious again. "I need to ask you something," Dante said, his expression thoughtful. "Next Saturday is Luca's championship game. I'd like you to come with us, if you're feeling up to it." "Of course," Mia replied automatically. "I'd love to watch Luca play." Dante nodded, but something in his manner suggested there was more to the request. "You should know that other families will be there," he said carefully. "Parents, but also people from my world. If you come as my guest, people will notice. They'll draw conclusions about what you mean to me." The implication hung in the air between them. Appearing in public with Dante Romano would be a statement, whether she intended it or not. It would mark her as someone under his protection, someone important to him. In his world, that kind of visibility could be both safety and danger. "What kind of conclusions?" she asked. "That you matter to me," Dante replied simply. "That anyone who wants to hurt you would have to go through me first." The words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, like she was precious, like she was worth protecting. "And do I?" she asked softly. "Matter to you?" Instead of answering immediately, Dante moved closer on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "More than you know," he said quietly. "More than might be wise." Then he was cupping her face in his hands, those strong, dangerous hands impossibly gentle against her skin. "Mia," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer in his accented voice. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, nothing interrupted them. His lips were warm and firm against hers, the kiss gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might break. But when she responded, when her hands came up to grip his shoulders and she opened her mouth under his, the kiss deepened into something that felt like promise and possession and the beginning of something that would change everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates things," he murmured. "Everything about this situation is complicated," Mia replied. But somehow, sitting there in the circle of his arms, with the taste of him still on her lips, complicated didn't seem like such a bad thing after all. The morning after their first kiss, Mia woke with a heightened awareness that seemed to electrify every nerve ending in her body. The memory of Dante's mouth on hers, the way his hands had cradled her face with such careful reverence, played on repeat in her mind as she made her way downstairs to find him already in the kitchen as usual. But everything felt different now. The way he looked up when she entered, the slight catch in his breathing, the way his gaze lingered on her lips for just a fraction too long before moving to her eyes. The air between them hummed with new possibilities and unspoken questions about what came next. "Good morning," he said, and even those simple words seemed loaded with meaning. His voice was slightly rougher than usual, as if he'd been thinking about their kiss as much as she had. "Morning," she replied, accepting the coffee he offered and trying not to think about how his fingers brushed hers during the exchange. The brief contact sent heat spiraling through her, and from the way his jaw tightened slightly, she suspected he felt it too. They were saved from having to navigate the new tension by Luca's enthusiastic entrance, full of excitement about his upcoming championship game and completely oblivious to the charged atmosphere between the adults. But throughout breakfast, Mia found herself stealing glances at Dante, noticing things she'd somehow missed before. The elegant strength of his hands as he cut fruit for his son. The way his dress shirt pulled slightly across his broad shoulders when he reached for something. The glimpse of olive skin at his throat where his collar fell open. After Luca left for school, Dante surprised her with an unexpected suggestion. "I think it's time we worked on your self-defense training," he said. "Dr. Romano cleared you for light physical activity, and given everything that's happened, I'd feel better knowing you could protect yourself." The training session took place in a room Mia hadn't seen before, a private gym on the penthouse's lower level that was equipped with everything from weights to a heavy bag to mats for sparring. Dante had changed into athletic clothes that showcased his physique in ways his business suits only hinted at, and Mia found herself struggling to concentrate on his instructions about proper stance and basic defensive movements. The real torture began when he moved behind her to adjust her form, his chest pressed against her back as his hands guided her arms into the correct position. "Focus on your center of balance," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Feel how your weight should be distributed." Mia tried to focus on the lesson, but all she could think about was the solid warmth of his body against hers, the way his hands felt spanning her waist, the masculine scent that seemed to surround her whenever he was close. When he demonstrated a defensive move that required him to grab her from behind and show her how to break free, she found herself leaning into him instead of pulling away. "Mia," he said quietly, and she could hear the strain in his voice. "You need to focus, or this isn't going to work." "I am focused," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Just not on self-defense." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and dangerous. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her again, might give in to the attraction that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Instead, he stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that suggested he was fighting for control. The moment was broken by the sharp ring of his phone. Dante's expression shifted immediately when he saw the caller ID, his entire demeanor becoming focused and alert in a way that reminded Mia exactly who she was dealing with. "Romano," he answered, moving away from her as he took the call. The conversation was conducted entirely in rapid Italian, but even without understanding the words, Mia could tell from his tone that something was wrong. Very wrong. When he ended the call, his face was grim. "We need to talk," he said, guiding her to sit on a bench at the edge of the gym. "There's been a development you need to know about." Fear crept up Mia's spine as she watched his expression. "What kind of development?" "Derek Martinez has hired a private investigator," Dante said without preamble. "He's been systematically searching every shelter, every hospital, every place someone in your situation might go for help. My contacts say he's getting close to this neighborhood." The blood drained from Mia's face as the implications hit her. "How close?" she whispered. "Close enough that I'm increasing security immediately," Dante replied. You won't leave this building without protection, and no one gets up here without my explicit approval. The cage was closing around her again, Mia realized. Different bars this time, but still a cage. I can't live like that, she said quietly. I won't be a prisoner again, not even a comfortable one. Dante's expression softened as he reached for her hands. It's not about keeping you prisoner, Kara. It's about keeping you alive. Derek Martinez doesn't strike me as the type of man who gives up easily, and if he's willing to spend money hunting for you, he has plans for when he finds you. The endearment slipped out naturally, and Mia felt something warm unfurl in her chest despite the fear. But before she could respond, Dante's phone rang again. This time the conversation was brief and conducted in English, setting up dinner arrangements that made Mia's stomach clench with new anxiety. My mother wants to meet you, he said after ending the call. Tonight, along with my sister Francesca and her husband. Meeting his family felt like crossing another line, moving deeper into his world in a way that would be harder to retreat from. But looking at Dante's face, seeing the importance this clearly held for him, Mia found herself nodding agreement despite her nerves. The dinner was held at his mother's house, an elegant brownstone in an exclusive part of the city that probably cost more than most people's entire net worth. Isabella Romano was a small, elegant woman in her late 60s with sharp dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Mia in the first 5 seconds of their meeting. Francesca, Dante's sister, was warmer but no less perceptive, and her husband Antonio clearly knew exactly what kind of family he'd married into. Throughout the meal, Mia felt like she was being evaluated, measured against some standard she couldn't quite identify. The conversation flowed around topics that seemed innocent on the surface but carried undercurrents she was only beginning to understand. References to family business, to responsibilities and loyalties, to the importance of choosing the right kind of person to trust with family secrets. But despite her initial nervousness, she found herself genuinely liking these people. Isabella was sharp and witty, with obvious adoration for her son and grandson. Francesca was intelligent and funny, clearly devoted to her family. Even Antonio, who seemed to handle some of the family's financial interests, treated Mia with careful respect that suggested Dante had made his feelings about her protection very clear. It was Isabella who finally addressed the elephant in the room, fixing Mia with that penetrating gaze over dessert and wine. My son tells me you saved Luca's life, she said simply. In our family, that kind of debt is sacred, but I'm curious about what you think it means to be part of this world. The question was clearly a test, and Mia struggled to find the right words. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, she replied honestly. Isabella smiled, but it was a sharp expression that reminded Mia exactly where Dante had inherited his intensity. I'm asking if you're prepared to love a man who sometimes has to make choices that other people might find morally questionable. I'm asking if you can live with the fact that his protection might require him to do things you don't want to know about. The bluntness of the question took Mia's breath away. Around the table, everyone had gone quiet, waiting for her response. She looked at Dante, seeing the careful neutrality he was trying to maintain, but underneath it she could sense how much her answer mattered to him. I think, she said slowly, that love means accepting all of someone, not just the parts that are easy to live with. And I think that a man who would die to protect his child, who opens his home to a stranger who saved that child's life, probably makes those difficult choices for the right reasons. Something flickered in Isabella's eyes, approval maybe, or at least the beginning of it. And you can live with not always knowing what those choices are. If it means being part of this family, Mia replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice, then yes, I can live with it. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet, both of them processing everything that had been said and implied during the evening. It wasn't until they were alone in his living room that Dante finally spoke. You didn't have to say that, he said quietly. About accepting all of me. You don't really know what that means yet. Maybe not all of it, Mia agreed, moving closer to where he stood by the windows overlooking the city. But I know enough. I know you're a good father. I know you honor your debts. I know you make me feel safer than I've felt in years. She was standing close enough now to see the conflict in his dark eyes, the want warring with what he probably thought was wisdom. Mia, he said, and her name sounded like a warning. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and everything that comes with my world becomes part of your world too. I'm already part of your world, she replied, reaching up to touch his face. The question is whether you want me here permanently. Instead of answering with words, Dante caught her hand and pressed it more firmly against his cheek, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. Then he was drawing her against him, and she could feel the careful control he'd been maintaining begin to crack. When he kissed her this time, there was nothing gentle or hesitant about it. This was hunger and possession and the promise of everything he'd been holding back. Mia responded with equal passion, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pressed herself against the solid strength of his body. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, giving her one last chance to retreat. Instead of answering, she began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers sure despite the way they trembled slightly. She was sure about this, sure about him, sure about the choice she was making even if she couldn't predict all the consequences. Their first time together was everything she'd imagined and more. Dante was gentle when she needed him to be and demanding when she wanted him to be, his focus entirely on her pleasure, her comfort, her needs. When it was over, as she lay in his arms feeling more complete than she had in years, Mia knew there was no going back from this, which made the sound of her phone ringing at 3 a.m. all the more jarring. Dante was instantly alert, reaching for the device with the reflexes of someone who lived in a world where late-night calls often meant danger. The number was blocked, but somehow Mia knew who it was before she answered. "Hello, Mia," Derek's familiar voice said, smooth and confident as ever. "I've missed you, baby. We need to talk." The line went dead, leaving them both staring at the phone in the darkness. Dante was already moving, reaching for his own phone to call his security team, his face set in lines that promised violence for anyone who threatened what was his. The hunt was over. Derek had found her, and now everyone would discover exactly how far Dante Romano was willing to go to protect the woman he was falling in love with. The week following Derek's phone call passed in a blur of heightened security and barely controlled tension. Dante had tripled the guards around the building, installed additional surveillance equipment, and personally vetted every delivery person, maintenance worker, and visitor who came within a block of his penthouse. Mia found herself simultaneously grateful for his protection and increasingly claustrophobic under the weight of constant vigilance. What they hadn't anticipated was Derek's patience or his willingness to forge dangerous alliances to get what he wanted. It was Friday afternoon when the pieces of his plan finally clicked into place. Dante was in an important meeting with his brothers and lieutenants, strategizing about the Torino family's recent aggressive moves in their territory. Luca was home early from school with a minor cold, and Mia was in the kitchen preparing his favorite soup when the intercom buzzed. "Delivery for Mr. Romano," the voice said through the speaker. "Medical supplies for Miss Chen." Mia frowned, moving to the video screen that showed the building's entrance. A man in a medical supply company uniform stood at the door, holding a large package and looking appropriately bored with his job. She didn't recognize him, but Dr. Romano had mentioned possibly sending additional supplies for her continued recovery. The building's security guard was checking credentials and scanning the package with equipment designed to detect weapons or explosives. Everything appeared routine, exactly as it should be. But something nagged at Mia, some instinct she couldn't quite place. She was reaching for the intercom to call down to Dante's office when she heard the unmistakable sound of the penthouse's private elevator arriving. Her blood turned to ice as she realized that meant someone had gotten past all of Dante's security measures, had somehow acquired the access codes that only family members possessed. "Luca," she called, her voice carefully calm despite the panic rising in her chest. "Come here, baby. We need to play a hiding game." The 7-year-old appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his school uniform and looking confused by the tension he could sense in her voice. "What kind of game?" he asked. "The kind where we hide really, really well," Mia replied, already moving toward the panic room Dante had shown her on her first day here. She grabbed Luca's hand and began guiding him toward the hidden door behind the bookshelf in Dante's study. But they weren't fast enough. "Hello, Mia," Derek's voice echoed through the penthouse as the main door opened. The delivery uniform had been a disguise, she realized with sick certainty. Somehow he'd gotten past security, gotten access to the building, gotten close enough to threaten everything Dante held dear. Mia pushed Luca behind her instinctively, her mind racing through everything Dante had taught her about defensive positioning and protecting what mattered most. She could hear Derek's footsteps moving through the apartment, methodically checking rooms, getting closer to where they stood frozen in the study. "Is that you hiding from me, baby?" Derek called, his voice carrying that familiar note of false sweetness that used to make her skin crawl. "You know I don't like it when you play games with me." Luca was pressed against her back, small and trembling, and Mia felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. This child had already lost his mother. She would die before she let Derek hurt him or take him away from the father who loved him so desperately. When Derek finally appeared in the doorway of the study, Mia was ready for him. The months of abuse, of being made to feel small and helpless and afraid, fell away as she stepped forward to shield Luca more completely. "There you are," Derek said, and his smile was the same charming expression that had fooled her for so long. "You've led me quite a chase, Mia. Do you have any idea how much time and money you've cost me?" He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and conventionally handsome, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of privilege and education. But now she could see what she'd missed before, the coldness behind his eyes, the way his smile never quite reached them, the sense of entitlement that radiated from every pore. "What do you want, Derek?" she asked, pleased that her voice came out steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I want my girlfriend back," he replied simply. "I want you to stop this ridiculous tantrum and come home where you belong. And I want compensation from Mr. Romano for the inconvenience of having to retrieve you from his establishment." The way he said establishment made it clear exactly what he thought she'd been doing here, and Mia felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. "I'm not your girlfriend," she said firmly. "I'm never coming back to you. And Dante doesn't owe you anything." Derek's expression darkened, the mask of reasonableness slipping to reveal the ugliness underneath. "Oh, but he does," Derek continued. "You see, I've made some new friends. The Torino family has been very interested in finding leverage against the Romano organization. Imagine their delight when I told them about Dante's little weakness." Understanding hit Mia like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just found her on his own. He'd allied himself with Dante's enemies, had probably given them information about the penthouse's security, about Luca's schedule, about everything that could hurt the man she loved. "You're using me as bait," she realized. "Smart girl," Derek said approvingly. "Always knew you had brains, even if you didn't always use them. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Dante and tell him you want to leave. You're going to walk out of here with me voluntarily, and in exchange, the Torinos won't hurt his precious son." As if to emphasize his point, Derek reached inside his jacket and pulled out a gun, not pointing it directly at Luca, but making sure the threat was clear. Mia's training kicked in automatically, everything Dante had taught her about assessing threats and protecting what mattered most. The gun was Derek's mistake. He was so focused on her, so confident in his control over her, that he wasn't paying attention to what she might be capable of now. 6 months ago, she would have been paralyzed by fear, would have done anything he asked to avoid violence. But 6 months ago, she hadn't found something worth fighting for. "Okay," she said, raising her hands in apparent surrender. "Okay, Derek. You win. I'll come with you." She took a step toward him, then another, drawing his attention away from Luca and toward her. Derek smiled, the same condescending expression she remembered from 100 fights where he'd been so certain of his victory. "That's my girl," he said. "I knew you'd see reason." Mia waited until she was close enough, until Derek had relaxed just slightly in his certainty of control. Then she moved exactly as Dante had taught her, fast and decisive and without hesitation. Her knee came up hard into Derek's solar plexus, doubling him over and causing his grip on the gun to loosen. In the same motion, she grabbed his wrist and twisted sharply, using his own momentum against him until the weapon clattered across the hardwood floor. Derek recovered faster than she'd expected, his hand catching her across the face with enough force to send her stumbling backward. But she'd bought precious seconds, and Luca was already moving toward the panic button on Dante's desk, exactly as his father had taught him. "You stupid bitch," Derek snarled, diving for the gun. But Mia was moving too, throwing herself between him and the weapon, willing to take whatever damage was necessary to keep it out of his hands. They hit the floor together, Derek's weight advantage giving him leverage as he tried to pin her down. For a moment, Mia felt the old helplessness creeping in, the familiar pattern of being overpowered and controlled. But then she heard Luca crying behind her, heard the terror in his young voice, and something inside her snapped into crystalline focus. She wasn't the broken woman Derek had driven from her home 6 months ago. She was someone who had found love worth fighting for, a family worth protecting, a life worth defending. And she would be damned if she let him take any of it away. Using every technique Dante had drilled into her, Mia fought back with a ferocity that clearly shocked Derek. When he grabbed for her throat, she broke his hold and drove her elbow into his ribs. When he tried to pin her arms, she twisted free and scrambled toward the gun. The sound of the private elevator arriving again made both of them freeze. Heavy footsteps pounded across the marble floor of the foyer, moving with the kind of speed that suggested someone who had received an emergency signal and was prepared for war. Dante appeared in the doorway of the study like an avenging angel, his face set in lines of such cold fury that Derek actually took a step backward. Behind him, Mia could see Marco and two other men, all armed and clearly ready for violence. Dante's gaze took in the scene instantly. The overturned furniture, Mia on the floor with a bruise already forming on her cheek, Luca pressed against the wall and crying, Derek standing over them with guilt written across his features. "Get away from them," Dante said, and his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made smart people run for their lives. Now, Derek, apparently, was not a smart person. Instead of backing down, he made a desperate grab for the gun that had slid under Dante's desk. It was the last mistake he would ever make. The confrontation was over almost before it began. Dante moved with the kind of lethal efficiency that spoke of years of experience in situations exactly like this one. When it was finished, Derek Martinez was no longer a threat to anyone, and the two Torino soldiers who had been waiting in the building's stairwell were in Marco's custody. In the aftermath, as Dante's men efficiently cleaned up the mess and made arrangements for the bodies to disappear, Mia found herself sitting on the floor of the study with Luca in her arms, both of them shaking from adrenaline and relief. "Are you hurt?" Dante asked, kneeling beside them and reaching out to gently examine the bruise on her face. His hands were steady, but she could see the way they trembled almost imperceptibly. "I'm fine," she assured him. "We're both fine." Luca was so brave, exactly like you taught him. Dante pulled both of them against his chest, his arms strong and protective around them. "When I got the signal," he said quietly, "when I thought I might lose you both." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Mia could hear everything he couldn't say in the roughness of his voice, could feel it in the way he held them like they were the most precious things in his world. "I love you," she said against his chest, the words coming easily now that she'd almost lost the chance to say them. "I love you, and I love Luca, and I'm never leaving this family. This is where I belong." Dante pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "Ti amo anch'io," he said. "I love you too. Both of you are my life." Later, after the police had been satisfied with the story about a home invasion gone wrong, after Luca had been convinced that the bad man could never hurt anyone ever again, after the building's security had been completely overhauled, they sat together in Dante's living room and talked about what came next. "You fought for him," Dante said wonderingly. "You fought for my son like he was your own." "He is mine," Mia replied simply. "You both are. This is my family now, and I'll protect it with everything I have." Dante reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then marry me," he said. "Be my wife, be Luca's mother, be part of this family officially and forever." The proposal was simple and honest and perfect, exactly what she would have expected from this man who had given her everything when she'd had nothing. "Yes," she said, and sealed her commitment with a kiss that tasted like promise and forever and the beginning of the rest of their lives together. 3 months after Derek's death, Mia stood in the executive offices of Romano Holdings, reviewing quarterly reports for their legitimate construction company with the same focus she'd once brought to her marketing career. The transformation felt surreal sometimes, the way she'd gone from sleeping in alleys to managing multi-million-dollar contracts. But Dante had been right when he'd said she had skills his organization needed. "You're frowning," Francesca observed, looking up from her own stack of paperwork. The older woman had become not just a sister-in-law but a true friend, helping Mia navigate the complexities of Romano family business with patience and humor. Bad numbers or wedding stress? Mia smiled, setting down the financial projections she'd been analyzing. Wedding stress, definitely. Your mother has very strong opinions about flowers. Isabella Romano's opinions about wedding planning were legendary in the family, and she'd thrown herself into organizing Mia and Dante's ceremony with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. Every detail had been scrutinized, from the choice of church to the selection of musicians to the proper way to honor both Mia's Chinese heritage and the Romano family traditions. She means well, Francesca assured her. And she loves you. Trust me, if she didn't approve of you completely, she'd have found a way to delay this wedding indefinitely. The engagement had been formalized in the traditional way, with Dante asking Isabella's blessing before presenting Mia with the Romano family ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother. The ceremony itself was planned for next weekend at the small church where 5 generations of Romanos had been married, with a reception at Isabella's house that would host nearly 200 guests from both the legitimate business world and the more shadowy aspects of Dante's life. But beyond the stress of planning, Mia felt a deep contentment that still surprised her sometimes. She'd found not just love, but purpose, not just safety, but belonging. The woman who'd once hidden in alleys now walked through these offices with confidence, respected by employees who knew she'd earned her place through both competence and the protection of their boss. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There had been whispered questions about the former homeless woman who'd somehow captured Dante Romano's heart, suspicious glances from old-school family associates who weren't sure what to make of her, moments when the weight of what she'd accepted felt overwhelming. But those doubts had faded as people saw how she handled herself, how she'd protected Luca, how Dante looked at her like she was the answer to prayers he'd never thought to make. The Romano family had a way of testing people, and Mia had passed every test they'd presented. Speaking of the wedding, Francesca continued, has Luca practiced walking down the aisle with the rings? Because last time I checked, he was more excited about wearing a tuxedo than actually remembering what he's supposed to do. Mia laughed, remembering the previous evening's dinner conversation where Luca had spent 20 minutes explaining to his grandmother exactly how he planned to carry the rings and whether it would be appropriate to wave at people during the ceremony. He's practiced, she assured Francesca, though I can't promise he won't get distracted by something interesting in the church. That evening, Mia found Dante in his study, working late as usual, but with an air of satisfaction that spoke of problems being permanently resolved. The Torino family's attempt to use Derek as leverage had backfired spectacularly, resulting in a decisive shift in Chicago's criminal hierarchy that left the Romanos stronger than ever. More importantly, all of Derek's former associates had been identified and neutralized, meaning there were no remaining threats to their family's safety. How was your day? He asked, looking up from his laptop as she entered the room. His smile was automatic now, the way it had become whenever she appeared, as if her presence alone was enough to improve whatever mood he'd been in. Productive, she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Your sister thinks we should hire more security for the wedding reception. Your mother thinks we need to add another course to the dinner menu. And I think we should elope to Vegas. Dante laughed, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. Too late for Vegas, Cara. My mother would never forgive us. And frankly, neither would Luca. He's been telling everyone at school that his new mom is getting married and he gets to wear a tuxedo. The casual reference to her, as Luca's new mom, sent warmth spreading through Mia's chest. The boy had started calling her mama about a month ago, tentatively at first, as if testing whether she'd accept the title. When she'd responded with tears of joy and a fierce hug, it had become official. She was no longer just Dante's girlfriend or fiancée. She was part of their family unit in the most fundamental way possible. How is he handling everything? She asked. All the attention and excitement? Better than I expected, Dante admitted. Dr. Castelli says it's healthy for him to have a complete family again, to know that the people he loves aren't going anywhere. He's been more confident at school, more outgoing with other children. The therapy had been Mia's suggestion, wanting to make sure Luca processed the traumatic events with Derek in a healthy way. But the sessions had revealed that having Mia in his life had done more than just give him a new mother figure. It had given him security, the knowledge that his small family was now complete and stable in a way it hadn't been since his biological mother's death. A week later, Mia stood in the bridal suite at the church, surrounded by Isabella, Francesca, and her own sister Lily, who had flown in from California for the ceremony. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of Italian design, elegant and classic with subtle details that honored both cultures represented in the union. Looking in the mirror, Mia barely recognized the confident, radiant woman staring back at her. "You look beautiful," Lily said, tears threatening to ruin her makeup. "I can't believe this is really happening. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost you forever." The reconciliation with her family had been one of the unexpected benefits of her new life. When Dante's people had contacted them to extend wedding invitations, Lily had broken down crying on the phone, admitting she'd been searching for Mia since she'd disappeared. Their parents, initially shocked by their daughter's dramatic life change, had been won over by Dante's obvious devotion and Luca's enthusiastic adoption of his new aunt. The ceremony itself was everything Mia could have dreamed. The small church was filled with flowers and candlelight, creating an atmosphere of intimate elegance that felt both sacred and romantic. Luca performed his role as ring-bearer flawlessly, walking down the aisle with serious concentration before breaking into a huge grin when he spotted his father at the altar. But it was the moment when Dante turned to watch her walk down the aisle that stole Mia's breath. The expression on his face was one of complete awe, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, that she was choosing him, that this moment was actually happening. When she reached him and he took her hands, she could see tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. The vows they exchanged were traditional, spoken in both English and Italian, but the emotions behind them were entirely personal. When Dante promised to love and protect her for all the days of his life, Mia heard echoes of every moment they'd shared, every crisis they'd weathered, every choice that had brought them to this moment. When she promised to stand by him through whatever challenges lay ahead, she was thinking not just of the unknown future, but of everything she'd already accepted about his world. The reception was a celebration that seemed to encompass not just their union, but the completion of something that had been broken for too long. Dante danced with her to music played by a string quartet, holding her close enough that she could feel his heart beating against her chest. Luca charmed every guest who would listen with detailed explanations of his new family structure and his plans for their future together. But the moment that stayed with Mia forever was late in the evening, when Luca had fallen asleep in a chair and she was sitting beside Dante watching their families mingle with an ease that spoke of genuine affection and acceptance. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. This sense of belonging not just to one person, but to an entire network of people who would protect and support each other no matter what challenges arose. Their honeymoon in Sicily was a revelation of another kind. Dante took her to the villages where his grandparents had grown up, introduced her to cousins and aunts and uncles who welcomed her with the warmth that seemed to be a Romano family trait. She saw him relaxed in a way she'd never witnessed, laughing at old stories and teaching her to make pasta using recipes that had been passed down for generations. It was there, in a small coastal town overlooking the Mediterranean, that they talked seriously about their future for the first time. About the children they wanted to have, the life they wanted to build together, the legacy they wanted to leave for Luca and any siblings who might join him. 6 months later, Mia stood in the kitchen of their new house, a sprawling estate in the suburbs that offered both security and space for their growing family. Her hand rested unconsciously on the gentle curve of her abdomen, still marveling at the life growing inside her. The pregnancy had been a surprise, discovered just weeks after their return from Italy, but it felt like the natural next step in a journey that had transformed every aspect of her existence. "Mama, can you help me with my homework?" Luca called from the dining room table where he was working on a math assignment. The title came so naturally now that sometimes Mia forgot there had ever been a time when he'd called her anything else. "Of course, baby," she replied, washing her hands and moving to sit beside him. "What are you working on?" As they bent over his textbook together, Mia reflected on how surreal her life had become. The woman who'd once scrounged for meals was now pregnant with her second child, living in a mansion, helping her stepson with homework while her husband conducted business calls in his home office. But somehow it all felt natural, as if she'd always been destined for this life, this family, this particular kind of happiness. That afternoon, while Luca was at soccer practice and Dante was handling some business downtown, Mia drove to the community center where she'd started teaching self-defense classes to women in situations similar to what hers had once been. It was her way of giving back, of using her experience and training to help others find the strength she'd discovered in herself. The class that day included women of all ages and backgrounds, united by their determination to never again feel helpless in the face of danger. There was Maria, recently escaped from an abusive marriage, and Janet, a college student who'd been attacked while walking to her car. There was Sarah, a single mother who wanted to be able to protect her children, and dozens of others who'd found the courage to take control of their own safety. Remember, Mia told them as they practiced the defensive moves Dante had taught her, the goal isn't to win a fight. The goal is to create an opportunity to get away. You're not trying to be heroes. You're trying to survive and protect what matters most to you. Watching from the doorway, Dante felt his chest tighten with pride and love as he observed his wife teaching these women to defend themselves. She moved with confidence and authority now, her voice strong and sure as she demonstrated techniques that could save lives. This was who she'd always been underneath the fear and vulnerability, he realized. Strong, protective, willing to sacrifice herself for others. He'd just given her the tools and the safety to let that strength emerge. After class, as Mia was gathering her equipment, one of the newer students approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said quietly. "For the first time in months, I feel like I might be able to protect myself. Like I might be strong enough to leave." "You are strong enough," Mia assured her. "You always were. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." Driving home together later that evening, with Luca chattering excitedly in the back seat about his soccer game and their unborn child growing safely inside her, Mia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been sleeping in alleys, convinced her life was over. Tonight, she was heading home to a family that loved her, carrying a child who would grow up surrounded by protection and opportunity, using her experiences to help other women find their own strength. It made her wonder about the power of second chances, about how life could transform in ways you never expected when you found the courage to protect what mattered most. Sometimes the worst moments could lead to the most beautiful destinations, if you were brave enough to keep fighting for what you believed in. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, with lights glowing warmly in the windows and the promise of dinner together as a family waiting inside, Mia felt a deep gratitude for every choice that had led her here. The decision to save a child in an alley, the choice to trust a dangerous man who'd shown her kindness, the determination to fight for a love that had seemed impossible from the beginning. Have you ever experienced a love that completely transformed your life? Maybe you've been that second chance for someone else, or perhaps someone has been that transformative force for you. There's something miraculous about the way the right person can walk into your life at exactly the moment when you need them most, turning your darkest hour into the beginning of your greatest joy.